Now on the cusp of winning the U.S. presidential election, he's poised to address the nation later today. New restricted national defense airspace has been put in place over Joe Biden's home in Wilmington, Delaware, and his lead over President Trump, particularly in Pennsylvania, is potentially the decisive moment in the race. Biden leads in Georgia and expanded his lead earlier this morning, and now it is Pennsylvania that he has led. The U.S. Postal Service said about 1,700 ballots had been identified in Pennsylvania at processing facilities during 2 sweeps yesterday and were being delivered to election officials. In a court filing early this morning, USPS said over 1,000 ballots had been found at the Philadelphia Processing and Distribution Center of USPS, and about 300 were found at the Pittsburgh Processing Center. Ballots must be received by this evening in Pennsylvania in order to be counted. President Trump is testing how far he can go in using the trappings of presidential power to undermine confidence in this week's election against Joe Biden as the Democrat gained ground in tight contests in key battleground states and then inched ahead in Georgia and a little while ago in Pennsylvania. The president cannot win the re-election without Pennsylvania and Georgia. Overnight, Georgia flipped blue. Just now, Pennsylvania has flipped blue with 95% of the vote count that has been reported. Backers of President Trump ramped up demonstrations last night against an election they believe was rigged or being stolen, clashing with counter-protesters as vote counting continued in battleground states. President Trump launched a tirade of unsubstantiated claims that he had been cheated out of winning the U.S. election as vote counting across battleground states early this morning showed Joe Biden closing in on a victory. President Trump made it clear in the weeks before the election that he wanted his supporters to vote for him in person, and he does not seem to grasp that this anti-mail-in ballot strategy may have hurt his re-election efforts. Several TV networks yesterday halted the live coverage of Donald Trump's first public appearance since election night after concluding that the president was spreading disinformation. He unleashed a flood of incendiary and unsubstantiated claims in a 17-minute address, insisting that Democrats were using, as he said, illegal votes, and he said this to steal the election from us. Republican lawmakers broke away from President Trump's grievances and false claims about the presidential election. And some Republican lawmakers criticized his unsupported claim that Democrats are trying to steal the election, saying his comments undermine the U.S. political process and the bedrock notion that all Americans should have their vote counted. After weeks of speculation about the potential for a tight 2020 presidential contest to wind up in court, the Trump campaign appears to have unveiled its strategy, a succession of lawsuits in hard-fought swing states and a full court press to give the impression that the election and ballot counting process were rife with fraud. The U.S. has set a grim new COVID-19 record yesterday following a week marked by high case numbers surpassing 120,000 infections in a single day. And it was the second day in a row that the country reported more than 100,000 infections. The cases have climbed for a second day in a row and surged by at least 120,276 yesterday, according to a Reuters tally, the second consecutive daily record rise as the outbreak spreads in every region. 20 out of the 50 states reported record one-day increases yesterday. The Federal Labor Relations Authority ruled this week that immigration judges are managers and not workers, denying them the right to collectively bargain. The rules come after the Trump administration sought to silence the judges, some of whom have spoken out against the policies on immigration and COVID-19. While all eyes were on the election, a federal agency dominated by appointees of President Trump revoked the collective bargaining rights of the nation's immigration judges. And a federal judge in Boston said she would likely reject a last-ditch effort by 2 men to avoid being extradited to Japan to face charges that they helped former Nissan Motor Company Limited chairman Carlos Ghosn flee the country. And Kosovo's president has resigned after his indictment for war crimes by a tribunal in The Hague. Hundreds of protesters, many dressed in school uniforms, marched through the streets of Haiti's capital to demand answers after the kidnapping and killing of a young woman that has incensed the nation. And at least 3 civilians killed in the latest shelling of Nagorno-Karabakh cities today as Azerbaijan pushed its offensive to reclaim control over the separatist territory for a 6th straight week. Azerbaijani rockets and artillery shells hit residential areas in Nagorno-Karabakh's regional capital in the city of Shushi in the hills just south of that. Ethiopia's prime minister is defending military operations against the country's well-armed Tigray region, asserting that the months of patiently trying to resolve differences have failed because of regional leadership's criminal hubris and intransigence. Several disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic to immunization camps against measles and polio are putting millions of vulnerable children at risk from deadly and debilitating diseases. This according to the United Nations, issuing an urgent call for funding to avert epidemics of the contagious diseases. The World Health Organization said it was observing an explosion of coronavirus cases in Europe and warned of a tough time ahead as mortality rates rose. Norway's capital of Oslo will shut down theatres, cinemas, training centres and swimming pools to contain the spread of the coronavirus, with bars and restaurants no longer able to serve alcohol. Sweden, which has shunned lockdown throughout the pandemic, registered over 4,600 new coronavirus cases, the highest number since the start of the pandemic. Poland reported a record 445 new deaths today, as the healthcare system is facing shortages in hospital beds. And the Czech Republic reported over 13,000 new coronavirus cases, bringing the total tally in the country since the pandemic started to almost 400,000. Austria is warning that all its COVID-19 intensive care beds could be full within 2 weeks because of the much stronger, more serious second wave of coronavirus infections. And China reported 36 new cases in mainland compared to 28 cases a day earlier. Austria's Victoria state has reported its 7th consecutive day of zero locally transmitted COVID-19 cases today, suggesting a 3-month strict lockdown in the city of Melbourne has successfully contained a second wave outbreak. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was sworn in for a second term today as final election results showed her landslide victory was even bigger than previously thought. And voters go to the polls on Sunday for the second general election since the end of military rule in Myanmar. And while Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy is expected to win again on the strength of its leader's enduring popularity, she has failed to make good on promises to unite the country. Top security officials from South Korea, the United States and Japan held virtual talks to discuss denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and security cooperation after the U.S. elections. India and the Philippines agreed today to enhance bilateral defense engagement and maritime cooperation, especially in training and procurement of military equipment, and to set up information sharing to counter terrorism. The first phase of the Malabar exercises 2020 underway, with the navies of India, U.S., Japan and Australia participating. And Nepal and India have a long-standing and special relationship, said the Nepalese Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli to the Indian Army Chief Manoj Mukund Narvane as the duo had a courtesy meeting today. Aiming at a place in the qualifier 2, the Sunrisers Hyderabad will square off against Royal Challengers Bangalore in the eliminator of the IPL 2020 today in Abu Dhabi. And Prime Minister Modi praised Italy for its fight against the coronavirus disease and said that all of us took lessons from the European country as he committed to work to expand India's bilateral relationship further. He made the comments during his virtual talk with his Italian counterpart, Giuseppe Conte. India recorded over 47,000 new cases of coronavirus, taking its total to 8.41 million. And the outbreak saw daily cases rise by more than 50,000 for the first time in 10 days. Bursting or selling crackers this season can earn you a fine of up to ₹1 lakh under Delhi's environmental minister's orders. And there was no immediate relief for Republic TV editor-in-chief Arnab Goswami, arrested in a 2018 abetment of suicide case as the hearing on his interim bail plea before the Bombay High Court remained incomplete. He was arrested from his residence in Mumbai on Wednesday and taken to the Alibag, where a case has been registered against him for alleged abetment of suicide of architect Anvay Naik and his mother over non-payment of dues by Goswami's firm. PTI's isolated leader Jahangir Tareen has arrived in Lahore today after spending several months in the United Kingdom. He was accompanied by his son Ali Tareen. PPP chairman Bilawal Bhutto Zardari said that he was shocked when he heard PMLN Supremo Nawaz Sharif's speech during the Pakistan Democratic Movement's first rally in Gujranwal, in which Nawaz named the country's top military leadership for orchestrating his ouster, among other things. The PPP chairman made the revelation during an exclusive interview with BBC Urdu. And amid the opposition's movement against the government, Prime Minister Imran Khan met government allies who piled up complaints before him regarding non-provision of development funds, price hiking and keeping them away from decision-making. The Prime Minister faced a difficult situation during a lunch he hosted for the government-allied parties, which was not attended by the Pakistan Muslim League Qaid, whose leader later in a meaningful tweet said his party's alliance with the ruling PTI was for the vote and not for the lunch. Pakistan captain Babar Azam will be looking to regain the top place in the ICC 2020 player rankings in the upcoming 3-match series against Zimbabwe to be held in Rawalpindi from Saturday. And a new strength and conditioning program and better shot selection was led to West Indies batsman Andre Fletcher, hoping a stronger tour of New Zealand will help him force his way back into contention for next year's 2020 World Cup. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all that I have in the news for you today on this lovely Friday morning. It is the 6th of November today.